The linoleum floors of Chicago Metro General were a sea of bland, sterile beige, a world away from the dust and chaos that stained her memories. Anya Sharma pushed a medication cart, its slight wheel wobble a familiar rhythmic complaint. Here, she was just another travel nurse, anonymous, forgettable, safe. She wore her anonymity like a set of fresh scrubs, a clean barrier between the woman she was and the ghosts she had outrun. "Sharma, Dr. Thorne needs you in Trauma 2, a charge nurse called out, not looking up from her screen. Anya nodded, her face a mask of placid competence. Inside, her stomach tightened. Dr. Marcus Thorne, Chief of General Surgery, was a man who thrived on protocol and condescension in equal measure. He saw a travel nurse, young and quiet, and saw only a temporary cog in his well-oiled machine. He didn't see the surgeon. He certainly didn't see the soldier. "That travel nurse doesn't know our protocols," she had overheard him complaining to a resident just last week. "Keep her on IVs and vitals. Don't let her near anything critical." The words hadn't stung. They had been a confirmation. Her cover was working. She entered Trauma 2. The room was a controlled hum of activity. Thorne stood over a patient, a man in his 50s, who had fallen from a ladder. The surgeon's silver-streaked hair was perfect, his blue scrubs crisply starched. He barked orders, his voice a sharp counterpoint to the steady beeping of the monitors. "Pressure's dropping. Why is his pressure dropping? Get me another unit of ONEG," he commanded. Anya's eyes scanned the monitors, then the patient. She saw the subtle distension of his abdomen, the faint bruising beginning to blossom near his flank. It was a classic Gray Turner's sign: retroperitoneal bleed. The fall had likely ruptured a kidney or his spleen. They were pumping fluid into a leaky vessel. "Dr. Thorne," she began, her voice low and even. "Have you considered a retroperitoneal source? His flank!" Thorne shot her a look of pure venom. It was the glare of a king whose authority had been questioned by a court jester. "Nurse," he clipped, his voice dripping with disdain. "I didn't ask for a diagnosis. I asked for blood. Are you capable of following a simple instruction?" The resident beside him winced. The other nurses suddenly found the floor intensely interesting. Anya simply met his gaze. "Yes, doctor." She turned and retrieved the blood, her movements economical and precise. She hung the bag, checked the line, and stepped back into the periphery. She had done her duty. She had warned him. The rest was on his head, on his license, on his conscience. She was just a nurse. An hour later, the patient was rushed to the operating room for an emergency laparotomy. Thorne had finally seen the bleed on the fast scan, long after she had spotted the physical sign. He never acknowledged her. Anya finished her shift, the quiet hum of the hospital a poor substitute for the silence she craved. She retreated to her small, sterile apartment, a place with no photos, no mementos, nothing that tied her to a time or a place. It was a holding pattern, not a home. She was just passing through. That's what she told herself. Passing through this life until the echoes of screaming and sand finally faded. The next day began with a roar. Not the distant thunder of artillery, but the shriek of a dozen sirens converging on their emergency department. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate. A bad one. The dispatch chatter spoke of multiple critical injuries, extractions, a scene of twisted metal and shattered glass. The emergency department erupted into a state of organized chaos. Anya moved through it like a phantom, her calm a stark contrast to the rising panic. She started lines, triaged patients, her hands steady, her mind clear. This was familiar territory, a language she understood better than polite conversation. Combat triage. The principles were the same. Red, yellow, green. Who was dying now? Who could wait? Who would be fine? Then they brought him in. He was strapped to a backboard, his uniform shredded and stained with blood and engine oil. The paramedics were bagging him, their voices strained. Male, 30s. Multiple penetrating injuries, looks like shrapnel. Unresponsive. BP is 60 over palp. Heart rate 140. Thorne was already there, taking charge. Get him into Bay 1. Massive transfusion protocol now. Let's get a chest tube in, stat! Anya was drawing blood from another patient when she saw the man's face. Her blood ran cold. The world tilted on its axis. The fluorescent lights of the emergency bay flickered, and for a heart-stopping second, she saw the blinding glare of a desert sun. Sergeant Jake Riley. Call sign, Reaper. She had last seen him covered in the dust of a Syrian village that did not officially exist, his leg mangled by an IED, a defiant grin on his face as she cinched a tourniquet so tight it should have made him scream. Now he was here, in Chicago, dying on a gurney. She felt a magnetic pull toward the trauma bay, an instinct honed in the crucible of war. She finished her task and moved, a ghost drifting through the chaos. What do we have? Thorne demanded, cutting away Riley's torn shirt. Multiple penetrating wounds to the chest and abdomen. Looks like fragments from the engine block, a resident reported. Anya stood at the edge of the controlled storm, her eyes missing nothing. She didn't see engine block fragments. She saw the telltale starburst pattern of a directed charge, the kind used in sophisticated explosive devices. This wasn't a simple car crash. I need X-ray in here now. Let's find these bleeds, Thorne ordered. Doctor, there's no time, Anya said. Yeah, her voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. Thorne turned, his face flushed with adrenaline and annoyance. Sharma, I thought I told you to stick to your lane. You're out of your depth. His pressure is about to drop to 0, she stated, her eyes locked on the monitor. He has a tension pneumothorax on the right and cardiac tamponade. The chest tube will relieve the pneumo, but his heart is being crushed. X-ray will be a post-mortem photograph. It was not a suggestion. It was a diagnosis, a prophecy. That's a wild guess, Thorne scoffed, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. He pointed a bloody glove at her. Stay out of this. As if on cue, the monitor screamed. A long, continuous tone. Jake Riley's heart had stopped. He's in PEA, starting compressions, a resident yelled, hopping onto the gurney. Thorne's face went white. Get me the ultrasound. I need to see the heart. It's too late for that, Anya said, stepping forward. The entire team froze, their attention snapping from the dying patient to the quiet travel nurse. Her demeanor had shifted. The placid mask was gone, replaced by a chilling calm, an aura of absolute authority. Stop compressions. What? That's insane, the resident protested. You're compressing a heart that can't fill. You're just pushing against a bag of blood, Anya explained, her voice devoid of emotion. You're doing more harm than good. She moved to the head of the bed. She looked down at Jake Riley's ashen face. For a moment, she saw not the man, but the mission, the oath. And then, something impossible happened. Jake's eyes fluttered open, just a slit. They were hazy, unfocused, staring at the ceiling. And then they found her. Recognition dawned in their dying depths. His lips, blue and bloodless, moved. A single, raspy word escaped. A name no one in that room had ever heard. Raven. His hand, lying limp at his side, twitched. It lifted. An inch. 2 inches. It was a colossal effort. A final act of will. He was reaching for her. Then his eyes rolled back, and his hand fell. Silence descended on the trauma bay. The only sound was the single damning note of the monitor. Every eye was on Anya. Thorne stared at her, his arrogance shattered, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. What did he call you? Anya ignored him. She stripped off her outer gloves. She turned to the terrified-looking scrub tech. Get me a thoracotomy tray. Now. The tech stared at her, then at Thorne, paralyzed by conflicting orders. Did you hear me? Anya's voice was like ice. Tray, scalpel, rib spreaders. And get the Belmont Rapid Infuser ready. We're about to run the city's blood bank dry. You can't do that, Thorne finally found his voice. You're a nurse. An emergency thoracotomy in the bay? That's reckless. That's butchery. Anya picked up a bottle of betadine. She didn't look at him. She poured it over Riley's chest, staining his pale skin a dark, muddy brown. I've performed this procedure in the back of a Blackhawk taking ground fire. I've done it in a mud hut with a headlamp and a bottle of whiskey for antiseptic, she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. The only thing being butchered here is this man's chance of survival, while you stand there quoting protocols that were written for fender benders, not war zones. She turned her head, her gaze pinning him to the spot. He has less than 90 seconds of oxygenated blood left in his brain. You can either help me, or you can get the hell out of my way. Your choice, doctor. The scrub tech, galvanized by her certainty, slapped the tray onto the stand. Thorne stood frozen, his world tilting. The hierarchy, the rules, the very foundation of his professional life had just been demolished by a travel nurse he wouldn't have trusted to change a dressing. He looked at the flat line on the monitor. He looked at the impossible calm on Anya's face. He made a decision. Do it, he breathed. Then, louder, to the stunned team. You heard her. Move! The room exploded into motion. Anya took the scalpel. 10-blade. Her hand was rock steady. She made a sweeping incision, an anterolateral thoracotomy, from his sternum to the gurney. A gasp went through the room. It was brutally fast, brutally efficient. Metzenbombs. She dissected down through the pectoral muscle, her movements a blur of practiced economy. There was no hesitation. Every cut had a purpose. Rib spreaders. She inserted the instrument and cranked it open, exposing the thoracic cavity. The man's ribs cracked, a sound that made the junior resident gag. Inside was a storm of blood. The pericardial sac, the fibrous bag around the heart, was swollen and dark blue, stretched taut like a balloon. Tamponade, just as she'd said. Pickups and scissors, she commanded. She incised the pericardium. A geyser of dark, venous blood erupted, splashing onto her scrubs, her face, and beneath it, the heart gave a single, weak flutter. A blip appeared on the monitor. We have a rhythm, someone shouted. It was slow, thready, but it was there. He's not out of the woods, Anya said, her focus absolute. Her fingers, impossibly nimble, explored the surface of the beating heart. There, a through and through on the right ventricle, a piece of shrapnel. She pointed without looking up. You, the resident, put your finger here. Don't press too hard, just enough to slow the bleeding. The young doctor, shaking, did as he was told. Anya's hands were already moving, placing sutures with a speed Thorne had never witnessed. She wasn't just repairing the wound. She was rebuilding the damaged muscle, her stitches precise and clean. Blood pressure is coming up, 70/40, the anesthesiologist reported, his voice filled with awe. Good. Now for the lung, Anya said, her attention shifting. She cross-clamped the pulmonary hilum, a maneuver so risky, so audacious, that Thorne felt his own heart skip a beat. One slip, and the patient would be dead. She found the bleeder, a torn intercostal artery, and ligated it. She removed the clamp. The bleeding stopped. She worked for another 10 minutes, a whirlwind of controlled, violent grace. She checked for other injuries, packed the chest, and began to close. The room was silent, save for the rhythmic beep of the monitor, now strong and steady. They were no longer watching a procedure. They were witnessing a miracle. When she was finished, she stepped back from the gurney. She was covered in blood, but her breathing was even, her expression placid. She peeled off her gloves and dropped them on the floor. "He's stable," she announced, "for now. Get him to the OR. He'll need a full washout and a more permanent repair. Dr. Thorne, he's your patient." She turned and walked out of the trauma bay, leaving a room full of stunned medical professionals and one very much alive soldier in her wake. Thorne stared after her, then at the patient on the table, whose heart was now beating with a steady, life-affirming rhythm. He looked at the gaping hole in the man's chest, a testament to the brutal ballet he had just performed. He felt a profound sense of humility, followed by a burning, all-consuming question. Who in God's name was Anya Sharma? Later, in the surgical lounge, the air was thick with whispered conversations. The story of the travel nurse who cracked a man's chest in the ER had spread through the hospital like wildfire. Thorne found her staring out a window, her reflection a pale, distant ghost in the glass. She had changed into clean scrubs. She looked once again like any other nurse, but he knew better. He cleared his throat. "Sharma." She didn't turn. "Doctor." He walked to her side, his usual bluster gone, replaced by a quiet intensity. "I've been a surgeon for 25 years. I've been chief of this department for 10. I thought I had seen everything. I was wrong." He paused, the words catching in his throat. "What you did in there, it wasn't in any textbook. It wasn't protocol. It was something else." "It was what was necessary," she said simply. "I was arrogant," Thorne admitted, the confession costing him dearly. "I was dismissive, and I was wrong. You saved that man's life. I would have let him die on that table while I waited for a picture." He finally looked at her. "I owe you an apology, and an explanation." Anya turned from the window, her eyes holding a weariness that went far beyond a long shift. "You don't owe me anything, doctor. Just do your job. Keep him alive." "But who are you?" he pressed. "The patient. He called you Raven." Before she could answer, a nurse poked her head into the lounge. "Dr. Thorne. The patient from the trauma bay. Sergeant Riley. He's awake. And he's asking for someone named Raven." Anya's shoulders slumped, a barely perceptible sign of defeat. Her carefully constructed wall of anonymity had been breached. They walked to the surgical ICU together. Jake Riley was intubated, his chest a landscape of tubes and dressings, but his eyes were open and alert. When he saw Anya, a look of profound relief washed over his face. He motioned for something to write with. Thorne handed him a clipboard. With a shaky hand, he wrote, "Knew you'd come, Doc. You always do." He looked at Thorne, his eyes intense. He wrote again, "That's Major Anya Sharma, best trauma surgeon the Army ever had. Call sign, Raven. She saved my whole team in Syria. Operation Nightfall." Thorne read the words, his mind reeling. Major? A combat surgeon? He looked at Anya, trying to reconcile the quiet nurse with the image of an officer leading a surgical team in a war zone. "Syria," Thorne whispered. "The military doesn't have an official presence in—" "It was a black site," Anya said, her voice flat. "A mission that never happened, with soldiers who were never there." The implication hung heavy in the air. She wasn't just a surgeon. She was a ghost from a shadow war. "Why are you here?" Thorne asked, his voice filled with a new kind of respect. "Working as a nurse? A woman with your skills? You could run any trauma center in the country." Anya looked at Riley, then back at the window, at the city lights that offered a different kind of darkness. "I left that life behind, or I tried to." "What happened?" A memory flickered behind her eyes, sharp and unwelcome. The smell of smoke and iron, the screams of the dying, the weight of too many losses in too short a time. "I lost a patient," she said, the words a hollow echo of a much larger, more terrible truth. "A mass casualty event. I was in command. I made a call. And people died who shouldn't have." It was a lie, a partial truth, twisted to hide the real horror. They weren't supposed to die, a voice in her head whispered. They were supposed to be erased. The real story was one of betrayal, a mission that wasn't about saving lives, but about cleaning up loose ends. She had been ordered to triage certain high-value assets, wounded prisoners with dangerous knowledge, as expectant, to let them die on her table. She had refused. She had saved them. And in doing so, she had signed her own death warrant. Her commanding officer, a man who answered to powers beyond the Pentagon, had made it clear. She was a liability. She had seen too much, and she had disobeyed a direct, albeit illegal order. So she ran. She erased Anya Sharma, Major, and became Anya Sharma, RN, a ghost hiding in plain sight. "We all lose patience," Thorne said gently. "It's the price of the job. It doesn't mean you quit." "It wasn't that simple," she said, a chilling finality in her tone. The next 24 hours were a blur. The hospital administration was in an uproar. Thorne, now her staunchest defender, ran interference, fielding questions about the unsanctioned procedure and the mysterious nurse who had performed it. Her identity, once exposed, began to unravel at an alarming speed. The fingerprints she'd left on the surgical equipment, routinely entered into an automated system, had likely already triggered an alert in a database she couldn't afford to be in. She knew her time here was running out. She had to disappear again. She was packing her sparse belongings in her apartment that evening when her phone buzzed. It was an encrypted number, a ghost from her past. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She almost didn't answer. But she had to know. "We know where you are, Raven," a smooth, cold voice said. It was a voice that haunted her nightmares. Director Elias Vance, the man who had given the order. The architect of the mission that had broken her. He wasn't military. He was something worse. Agency. A spook who operated in the spaces between laws and morality. "Leave me alone, Vance," she said, her voice tight. "I'm afraid I can't do that," he purred. "You left a loose end. Sergeant Riley. He was also on the list of those who knew too much about Operation Nightfall. His car accident was no accident. And now you've brought him back from the dead. That's inconvenient." The floor dropped out from under her. Riley's crash. It had been an assassination attempt, and she had just put him right back in the crosshairs. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I'm in Chicago. I'll be at your hospital tomorrow at noon. We have much to discuss. About your future. About Sergeant Riley's. Don't think about running. We have eyes everywhere. On the hospital. On your friend, Dr. Thorne. Be a professional, Anya. Let's resolve this cleanly." The line went dead. Cleanly. To a man like Vance, that meant with a bullet or a syringe. I stood there in the silence of my empty apartment, the phone feeling like a block of ice in my hand. For 3 years, I had been running. 3 years of looking over my shoulder, of never staying in one place for too long, of being a ghost. I had convinced myself that I was hiding, that I was safe. But I had only been delaying the inevitable. The past doesn't just disappear, it waits. And now, it had found me. My first instinct was to bolt. I had a go bag under the bed, new identity, cash, a clean phone. I could be in Canada by morning. But then I saw Jake Riley's face in my mind, the trust in his eyes. He had reached for me from the edge of death. And Vance's threat, on your friend, Dr. Thorne. They were targets now, because of me. Running wouldn't save them. It would only sign their death certificates. For the first time in a long time, the fear was replaced by a cold, hard rage. They had taken my career. They had taken my name. They had tried to take my soul. I would not let them take any more lives. I spent years running from the ghost of who I was. No more. The time for hiding was over. The time for fighting had come. The next morning, Anya walked into Chicago Metro General not as a nurse, but as a soldier preparing for battle. She found Thorne in his office, poring over Riley's chart. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. She told him everything about Operation Nightfall, the illegal orders, the betrayal. She told him about Director Vance and his impending arrival. Thorne listened, his face growing paler with each word. The world he knew, one of peer-reviewed studies and insurance billing codes, was colliding with a shadow world of black ops and state-sanctioned murder. "What are you going to do?" he asked when she finished, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to run," she said. "He's coming here because he thinks this is his territory. He thinks I'm a cornered animal. But he's wrong. This hospital, this is my territory now, and you're going to help me defend it." Her plan was audacious, dangerous, and hinged on the one thing Vance couldn't control: medical science. At 11:45, two men in expensive, ill-fitting suits walked into the hospital lobby. They moved with a predatory stillness that set them apart from the civilian hustle. A few minutes later, Elias Vance followed. He was impeccably dressed, a man who could have been a CEO or a senator, but his eyes were cold and empty, the eyes of a shark. He and his men were met by hospital security and Dr. Thorne. "Director Vance, I presume," Thorne said, his voice surprisingly steady. "I'm Dr. Marcus Thorne, Chief of Surgery. I'm afraid we have a situation. The hospital is under a Code Silver lockdown." Vance raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "A lockdown? How convenient." "A patient was brought in this morning with symptoms consistent with a highly contagious, weaponized hemorrhagic fever," Thorne lied, his delivery flawless. "We've had to isolate the entire surgical wing. For your own safety, I must insist you and your men proceed to a designated quarantine suite." Vance's smile didn't reach his eyes. "A clever gambit, Doctor. But I'm not here for a checkup." "I'm aware," Thorne said. "Major Sharma is currently in the hot zone, treating the index patient. You can't get to her, and if your men try to force their way through, they risk starting a pandemic in the middle of Chicago. I imagine your superiors wouldn't appreciate that kind of public exposure." It was a bluff, but a brilliant one. Vance was a man who operated in the shadows. The threat of a full-blown public crisis, of news vans and the CDC descending on the hospital, was the one thing he couldn't counter with force. He was trapped. "Very well, Doctor," Vance said, his voice dangerously soft. "Lead the way. But make no mistake, this changes nothing." Thorne led them to an isolated ICU pod, where Anya was waiting. She was dressed in a full-body positive pressure suit, the kind used for Ebola or worse. The patient in the bed was a medical dummy, hooked up to monitors displaying terrifyingly erratic vital signs she had programmed herself. Vance stood on the other side of a thick glass wall, speaking to her through an intercom. "You've made a powerful enemy, Anya," he said, his voice tinny through the speaker. "You made me your enemy when you ordered me to become a murderer," she shot back. "That's not what a doctor does. It's not what a soldier does." "You were always so naive," Vance sighed. "This is the real world. There are no clean hands. I'm offering you a way back. Your skills are too valuable to waste playing nurse. There's a place for you in my organization, a research position, off books, total autonomy. All you have to do is help us correct the Sergeant Riley problem, a simple medical error, a potassium overdose. No one would ever know." It was the devil's bargain, her life, her career, in exchange for Jake's. "What would you have done in Dr. Sharma's position? Share your thoughts in the comments." Anya looked at the dummy in the bed, then at Vance's reflection in the glass. She thought of the oath she had taken. "First, do no harm." "My answer is no," she said. "A pity," Vance said. "Then we'll do this the hard way." He turned to his men. "Find the hospital's main server room. We'll shut down the life support systems for this entire wing. Let's see how long her principles last when all her patients start dying." But as his men turned to leave, they found their way blocked. A half-dozen uniformed Chicago police officers had appeared, weapons drawn, and standing with them was a grim-faced man in an FBI windbreaker. "Elias Vance," the FBI agent said. "You're under arrest." Vance stared, his composure finally cracking. "On what authority?" "On the authority of the United States government," the agent replied. "We received an anonymous tip, a detailed file containing evidence of an unsanctioned intelligence operation on U.S. soil, including illegal wiretaps, kidnapping, and multiple attempted assassinations. The file was quite specific. It even included your travel itinerary." Anya watched from behind the glass. While Vance had been posturing, she had been uploading a data file from a hidden partition on her phone, a file she had compiled 3 years ago, the insurance policy she had never thought she would have to use. It contained every illegal order, every mission parameter, every casualty from Operation Nightfall. Vance looked from the FBI agents to the glass wall, his eyes locking with Anya's. He understood. She hadn't just built a wall. She had built a trap. He had come to her hospital, her territory, and she had used its systems, its protocols, and its people to take him down. As they led him away in handcuffs, Vance's reign of terror was over. The ghosts of her past were finally silenced. The aftermath was quiet. The lockdown was lifted. The FBI debriefed Anya and Thorne, classifying most of the information under national security. The official story was that Vance was part of a rogue faction, disavowed by the government. It was a neat, tidy lie. A week later, Anya stood by Jake Riley's bedside. He was off the ventilator, weak but breathing on his own. "Heard you caused some trouble, Doc," he rasped, a faint smile on his lips. "You started it," she replied, her own smile feeling foreign but welcome. "By not dying when you were supposed to." "Stubbornness of the Rangers," he said. "Thanks, Raven. For everything." "Get some rest, Sergeant," she said softly. Later that day, Dr. Thorne called her into a hospital boardroom. The entire executive committee was there. They looked at her with a mixture of awe, fear, and profound respect. "Major Sharma, or Dr. Sharma," the hospital president began, fumbling with his words. We find ourselves in a unique position. Your actions, while unorthodox, were nothing short of miraculous. Your skills are undeniable." Thorne stepped forward. "Anya, what you did here opened our eyes. We are bound by protocols and textbooks, but you showed us there's another way. A better way for certain situations. We live in a world of increasing violence, mass shootings, terrorist attacks. We need to be better prepared." He slid a folder across the polished table. "This is a proposal for the creation of a new department, the Center for Advanced Trauma and Austere Medicine. A place to research and teach the techniques of combat medicine to civilian surgeons. A place to innovate. We want you to run it." He looked at her, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine admiration. "We don't want you to be a ghost anymore, Doctor. We want you to be a leader. We want you to teach us." Anya looked at the proposal, at the title printed in bold letters. Director Anya Sharma, M.D. It was a return, a resurrection. Not to the woman she had been, haunted and running, but to the woman she could become. A healer, a teacher, a leader who had integrated the battlefield with the emergency room, creating something stronger than either. She thought of the years spent in the shadows, of the fear that had been her constant companion. She realized that by saving Jake Riley, she had also, finally, saved herself. She looked up at the board, at Thorne, and for the first time in 3 years, she felt the weight lift from her shoulders. "All right," she said. a real smile spreading across her face. When do I start? The final scene is 6 months later. Anya, in a crisp white lab coat with her new title embroidered over the pocket, stood before a packed auditorium. It was filled with surgeons, residents, and nurses from all over the country. Behind her, a screen displayed a complex diagram of a field-expedient surgical technique. "The golden hour is a luxury," she began, her voice clear and confident, echoing through the hall. "In the field, you don't have an hour. You have minutes, seconds. The rules are different. The stakes are higher. Today, I'm going to teach you how to operate when all the rules have been broken." She was no longer hiding from her past. She was using it, forging it into a tool to save countless more lives. She had found her new mission. She was home. She had faced down the demons of her past, not with a weapon, but with a scalpel, and in doing so, had discovered that the truest way to heal oneself is by teaching others how to heal.